Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to be covering resume tips for data engineers, including plenty of specific resume examples, as well as a few career tips. More specifically, in today's video, I'll be talking about how to include resume essentials like your contact info and education, summarizing work experience, and listing tools and techniques, as well as specific tips for contractors, consultants, and new graduates. We'll also talk about a few things that you should not include on your resume, as well as a few other career tips to keep in mind. For those of you who aren't familiar with Burtch Works, we're an executive recruiting firm specializing in quantitative fields like analytics, data science, and of course, data engineering. Over the past several years, Burtch Works market insights have been repeatedly mentioned in the press, including The Economist, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, CNBC, and the Chicago Tribune, among many others. Burtch Works has also been repeatedly recognized by Forbes as one of America's best recruiting firms, including in 2021. Our data engineering recruiting team shares their expertise with thousands of data engineers and their employers, including plenty of resources about data engineering careers and hiring on the Burtch Works blog and YouTube channel. We know that resume writing can be overwhelming, and it's especially daunting if it's been a while since you last worked on your own. We generally recommend thinking of your resume as a living document. Pull it up occasionally to tweak it along the way. And if you keep your resume at least somewhat current, you'll have a good jumping off point if you come across an exciting job opportunity. So you'll be ready to go versus having to do a complete overhaul to something you haven't touched in years. This may sound obvious, but make sure to include contact info at the top of your resume. You'd be surprised how many people forget to do this. The header of your resume should contain your full name, location, and contact information. A working phone number and email address are absolutely crucial so potential employers can reach you. You don't necessarily need your full street address, but make sure you at least have your city and state. And as a side note on location, if you're applying to roles outside of your home area, consider including a few words to explain your situation, whether it's adding the words open to relocation or something more detailed like relocating to Denver in October of 2021. A blurb like that can help answer any questions around your willingness to make a move. And when it comes to your resume header, we recommend simple formatting for this important information. Many companies use applicant tracking systems or programs that process incoming resumes. So there's a chance that unique or fancy formatting won't be recognized by these programs. And what might look great on a printed version could actually import differently and get lost in the process. Now, moving on to your education info, some employers will want to verify your degree, so make sure to include your degree type as well as where and when you studied. If you're early on in your career, within the first few years or so, we usually advise placing your education before your work experience. Then, once you're fairly established and have 5 years or more on the field, you'll have gained some great professional experience. So we recommend moving your education to the end. And no need to include your GPA at this point. It's generally not necessary once you've landed your first job out of school. We also get a lot of questions around resume length. While it's important to be concise, you don't want to sacrifice valuable content just to fit everything onto a single page, especially as you get more senior and have a bulk of relevant experience under your belt. The old one-page rule was key back in the day when everyone printed out resumes. But thanks to the digital age, we have a little bit more flexibility today. We do generally still recommend that you try to keep it 2 pages if possible. Anything beyond that, and you run the risk of losing the reader's attention. For a general rule of thumb, if you have less than a decade of experience, try to stick to a single page. And if you've been working for 10 years or more and have enough relevant and applicable experience to showcase, go ahead and use a second one. If needed, you can always tweak the margins a bit to fit more on each page. And don't be afraid to use bullets. You don't want your resume to be jam-packed with huge chunks of heavy text. So use clear and concise bullets, generally to make easier reading. And when covering your professional experience, try to keep this section focused on previous data engineering positions you've held. You can minimize anything less relevant. If you're just a couple years into your career or hoping to land your first job out of school, it can be beneficial to include some internships or volunteer positions to demonstrate some degree of work experience. And I'll be sharing some tips a bit later on about how to do that. You also want to make sure your professional experience shows progression. For example, say you've been at the same company for 5 years and you've been promoted. Some data engineers will just include their current title on their resume, but many hiring managers would like to see the different positions you've held at the same company to show progression, if applicable. For data engineers, it's always important to remember that your resume is often your first impression on a potential employer. If you have a clear and concise resume, you're more likely to get a call back. Overly long and wordy resumes with typos, spacing errors, and weird formatting distract the reader from what is most important, your experience and your credentials. Putting the time into creating a well-crafted resume will help keep the focus on what you bring to the table and hopefully help you land the interviews and the job that you want. Okay, so now that we've covered the basics, let's talk about how you can adjust your resume for specific data engineering positions. We recommend creating a base resume, which will serve as the bulk of your resume, and then adjusting it slightly for each position you're interested in. Make sure to review the job description carefully, and if you have certain skills or experience that are particularly relevant, be sure to elaborate and expand on those. If you're short on space, you can cut down on any other experience that's not quite as applicable to the role that you're applying to. One thing we recommend, especially if you have a broad background, is having multiple versions of your resume. You can have one that is focused more on X or Y and one that is focused on your experience in, say, Z. Having these different versions can save time if you're in an active job search, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel if you find a new position you're excited about. We see fewer objective sections on resumes these days, and when we do, they're often pretty generic and don't add much value to the overall document. So unless you're looking to make a drastic career change that requires explanation, we think it's a better idea to use the prime real estate just below the header for a concise summary section that can highlight relevant methodologies, skills, and tools that you've used. A killer summary section at the top can really make your resume stand out. And here's just one basic example. It can be a quick bulleted list or a few columns, but the goal is to create a summary that serves as a quick checklist of your skill set. Make sure you include easy to digest specifics in your summary and then follow up with applied examples that support this information in the body of your resume. Only list tools and technologies that you have experience with. Keep in mind which tools are most relevant to the position you want. And this is an example of how you can organize them into sections to make them easy for hiring managers to read at a glance. Occasionally, we've spoken with data engineers who have listed tools on their resume that they aren't actually proficient in. This is not only misleading, but it won't actually help you in your job search when you have to explain how you've used these tools in your interviews. Only include tools and skills that you've used and be transparent about the extent of your experience with them. Make sure to include the company name, location, job titles, and dates. Additionally, it's important that these details match up with what you have listed in your LinkedIn profile, since hiring managers or recruiters uh, will often see both, and discrepancies between the two can raise red flags. When summarizing your work experience, try to include the tools you've used as well as the impact you had or the outcome of the project, rather than simply listing items as if you're writing a job description. We also wanted to share a few specific tips to keep in mind for contractors, consultants, and recent grads. If you're a consultant or contractor, include your company name as well as the client, as shown in the example here. Make sure you include the company that you're working for as the company name below your job title. Then you'll want to also list the client's name in the description. As a recruiter or hiring professional, we want to be able to have a clear understanding of where you are working and the nature of your role, as well as the types of clients you're working for. As domain or industry experience is becoming more important for some data engineering roles, it can work to your benefit to include these clients, especially if that experience is particularly relevant to the role you're applying to. If you're working on putting together your first or second resume after graduation, you can also include relevant projects and internship experience in the same style as your work experience. Academic projects listed on your resume should have one or two bullet points describing the project and tools used. Here you can see an example of a section for academic projects, including the school and dates for each. If possible, it's best to highlight internships or projects that are relevant to data engineering positions. But if you're just graduating, then employers will still want to see what experience you've had. Now that we've talked about what to include in your resume and how to do it, let's talk a bit about what you should not include on your resume. Do not include photos or your date of birth. Employers that we've worked with typically request that photos, such as headshots and date of birth, are not included on a professional's resume. This is usually due to anti-discrimination laws in the US. Do not include every detail. Even if you have a lot of work experience, we still recommend that you keep your resume to 1 to 2 pages. You should only need 3 to 4 bullet points to summarize each role, and try to focus on experience that is relevant to the role you're applying to. Keeping things concise will work to your advantage. Do not list tools repeatedly. You do not need to list your tools more than once on your resume. Because there are so many tools that data engineers use, we sometimes see data engineer resumes that list tools on their summary of skills section in a tools and technologies table. Sometimes this is even on the same page, and in one of their experience descriptions below their job description in an environment or tool section, etc. As long as you have a tool section, you can include some additional notes in your work experience on how you use them and such, but you don't need to list them in multiple sections over and over. Do not omit your education just because it was a long time ago or in another country. Employers will want to see your education and credentials. They really matter. And to wrap things up, there were a few career tips we wanted to share for data engineers looking to be proactive about their career growth. Tip number 1. If you don't have cloud experience, try to take a course or two to learn at least one of the major cloud platforms, such as AWS, Azure, and GCP. These are always in demand. AWS especially has a lot of flexibility, so it's a highly desired addition to your toolkit. We've spoken often with early career data engineers and even more experienced engineers who are trying to transition into the big data world. We usually discuss different options on how to up their skill set when they don't have the opportunity through their current employer. This is such a common concern, but we're happy to say we've seen a number of data engineers work really hard on their own time by gaining professional certifications in specific tools and technologies and creating online portfolios of work examples. It not only showcases your work, but from our experience, it usually has a positive impact on hiring managers. It shows your passion and drive for the work you're doing or want to do professionally. We also can't stress enough that in addition to taking a course or earning a certification, it's really important to start actually using and practicing the programming languages or tools that you're learning to support. You can, for tip number 2, you can set yourself apart from the competition by learning or gaining an understanding of machine learning and AI concepts and techniques. Most data engineers work alongside a team of data scientists, so this can actually be a requirement for many open positions that we see out there now. Tip number 3, don't forget about the soft skills. They matter and don't go unnoticed. We see plenty of data engineers who don't advance in the interview process based on their communication skills or delivery. It's never a bad idea to practice how you might present your resume to a potential employer or even a recruiter, since we are usually the first person you interact with in the application process. And tip number 4, presentation skills. This goes well with tip number 3. These presentations can sometimes be sharing your findings from a case study or a project you've done. Once complete, the presenter will typically have to explain their work to a member of the hiring team or even a panel. This is another opportunity for a data engineer to showcase their ability to communicate and summarize their work from a higher level. And this is a key skill for working on cross-functional teams or presenting to management. And tip number 5, ask for feedback. Never be afraid to ask recruiters or hiring managers for feedback after interviews. Even if you don't get the job, this is a great way to learn and improve your interviewing skills. So that wraps up our tips for today, but stay tuned for more videos coming soon. And if you're looking to add to your data engineering staff, we'd be happy to speak with you and do some brainstorming. We offer contingency, retained, and contract staffing services from entry level up to senior leadership. Just send an email to info@burtchworks.com to learn more. And for more hiring market insights, check out burtchworks.com/blog, where you can find blogs on COVID-19 hiring trends, skills and interview tips specifically for data engineers, and hiring advice. You can also follow Burtch Works across our social media channels to stay up to date on our latest posts. And here on YouTube, you can find more data engineering career tips, 2021 predictions for data engineering, and more data engineering resources that are coming soon. If you'd like to see what roles we have that may be a fit for your experience, email info@burtchworks.com to start the process. And thank you all for joining me. Have a great day.